One day I had a realization that bothered me. I realized that when I read the Bible, I approached place names the exact same way that I would read fantasy fiction. Bethel, Beersheba, Babylon. They're familiar. I grew up hearing them, but I had no idea where they actually were. I couldn't picture them. I couldn't point to them on a map, certainly. I was reading real history as if it were fantasy. Welcome back to OT in Context. I'm Scott Smith, and in our last episode, we talked about why modern readers struggle with the Old Testament, how we have a long way to go before we even achieve the level of ignorance of the Pharisees. Today, we start fixing that, and we're going to start with geography, because until you can picture where things happened, the what and the why, they just won't really make sense. Here's what I mean by the Middle Earth problem. When you read Tolkien, you encounter names like Gondor, Rivendell, and Mordor. When you read Lewis's space trilogy, one of my favorites, you get Malacandra, Paralandra, Thulcandra. They evoke a vague sense of somewhere far away and long ago, and that pretty much achieves the goal of placing you outside of the world you know and into the world of fiction. Tolkien and Lewis created imaginative worlds. The emotional resonance matters more than the physical coordinates. But here's the thing. The Bible, it isn't fiction. We know this, but I don't think we've necessarily really let it sink in. Old Testament history is world history. The places mentioned in Scripture and the geography of the ancient Near East are the same thing. Same places, same terrain, same story. When the text says that Abraham traveled from Ur to Haran, to Canaan. It's describing a real journey across real terrain. 917 miles, according to those quick clicks, probably closer to 1,000 miles following the actual path. That's not a vague, he went somewhere. It's a real, measurable trip. When it says that the Israelites crossed the Jordan, that's a real river you can still visit today. You can stand exactly where they stood. When the prophets warn about Assyria coming from the north, they're describing a genuine geopolitical threat that shaped everything. The names in the Bible aren't fantasy locations. They're historical places with real characteristics: mountains, valleys, rivers, deserts, trade routes, natural barriers. And when we read them like fantasy, we miss so much. We miss why God gave Israel that particular land. We miss why certain nations were threats and others weren't. We miss the strategic significance of cities like Jerusalem, perched on a ridge, controlling key routes, defensible from every direction. Geography isn't just nice context to know. Understanding geography explains why things happened the way that they did. Let me give you a principle that will transform how you read the Old Testament. Geography constrains and enables human activity. People need water, they need food, they need protection from enemies, and terrain determines where those things are available. This is the Fertile Crescent. It's called that because it's a crescent-shaped arc of land that was particularly verdant. It was good for raising crops, raising herds, and supporting human life. It begins down here at the north end of the Persian Gulf. It follows the Tigris and Euphrates rivers upstream and northwest. Then it bends along the Mediterranean coast and continues down through the Nile Delta. And here's what's remarkable. Almost everything that happens in the Old Testament happens somewhere along that crescent. Why? Because this is where life was sustainable. Outside that arc, desert. Inside it, civilization. When Abraham left Ur and traveled to Canaan, he followed the Fertile Crescent. He didn't cut straight across from Ur to Canaan. That would have been less miles, but that would have been suicide. He took the long way around because that's where the water was. When we don't understand this, we're aware that Abraham had a long journey. We don't know how long. You might know the names of the cities, but you don't know where they are or how far apart they were, what route he followed. But when you do understand this, Abraham's journey stops being a vague, He went from here to there and becomes a strategic decision shaped by terrain. Now here's where it gets really interesting for understanding the Old Testament. Let's look at where God placed Israel. This land, Canaan, later Israel, roughly the region around Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan, it sits right in the middle of the Fertile Crescent we just looked at. It's right in the center of Mesopotamia over to the right and the Nile to the left. It's the land bridge connecting Africa, Asia, and eventually Europe. To the southwest, Egypt, one of the great ancient powers. To the northeast, around the bend of the river here, is Mesopotamia, home to Assyria, Babylon, Persia. Israel sat directly between them. This meant two things. First, opportunity. Every major trade route between the great powers passed through this tiny strip of land. If you controlled it, you controlled commerce. Solomon's wealth didn't come from nowhere. It came from his kingdom's position along these routes. Second, vulnerability. Every army marching from Egypt to Mesopotamia, or Mesopotamia to Egypt, or later, from anywhere in the south near Egypt up to Anatolia or vice versa. All of these options went straight through Israel's living room. This is why the prophets are constantly warning about threats from the north and from the south. This is why tiny Israel got conquered over and over by great empires. They weren't randomly unlucky. They were geographically exposed. When God gave Israel this land, he wasn't giving them a safe, hidden paradise. He was placing them at the crossroads of the world. And that placement shaped everything about their story. So here's what I want to do in this series. I want to help you to build your own mental map. Not an exhaustive scholarly atlas, just a basic picture you can keep in your head so that when you read a place name, it actually means something. Think of it like learning a new city. At first, everything is confusing. But after a while, you develop a feel for it. You know the major roads, the key landmarks, where the Starbucks is, the general layout. You don't know every street, but you can navigate. You can find your way around. That's exactly what we're going for. Over the next few episodes, we'll cover the regions. Mesopotamia between the rivers, the Levant along the coast, Egypt along the Nile, the major cities, ancient places like Ur, Babylon, Jerusalem, and how they rose and fell, the major trade routes, the highways of the ancient world that connected everything. And we'll look at the terrain. What were the mountains, the valleys, and the deserts, and why did they matter? By the end, when you read, the Israelites were taken into exile in Babylon, it won't just be a passing phrase connecting the narrative. You'll know exactly where it is. It's a 1,000-mile journey northeast along the Fertile Crescent and around and down to Babylon, and you'll understand why that distance mattered. Here's what I want you to take from this episode. The Bible happened in a real place, not in Middle Earth, not a vague somewhere in the desert, in specific locations with specific characteristics that shaped the outcomes. And when you start to see the geography, when the mental map clicks into place, the Bible stops feeling like ancient legend and starts to feel more like what it is, history. Real people walked these roads. Real cities rose and fell on these hills. Real armies crossed these rivers. And the God who orchestrated this story, who called Abraham out of Ur, who planted Israel at the crossroads of the world, who brought them back from exile across 1,000 miles of terrain, that God is still at work today. The geography matters because it anchors the story in reality. And that reality is where our faith lives. In the next episode, we're going to zoom in on that Fertile Crescent and start learning the major regions. We'll cover Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Egypt, the three areas you need to know to navigate the Old Testament. If you're finding this helpful, I'd love for you to subscribe and share it with someone in your small group, at your church, or perhaps just a friend who's also interested in this kind of thing. And if you want to explore this geography for yourself along with your personal Bible study, check out OT in Context at otincontext.com. It's the tool I built because I couldn't find what I needed anywhere else. I'm really glad you're here. I'll see you in the next one.